of Gripped Media. Now, Kevin Haig runs a local glamping site in the area. He joins me online. Kevin, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And thanks for making time for us this morning, because I realised there must be a lot going on in the village this morning. I mean, what are you hearing from the local people following what happened last night?
I think there's a great deal of shock and a great deal of anger. I think the shock comes from how the protesters have been treated in the last few days, and anger at there's no voice being heard. The protesters have constantly asked for dialogue, constantly asked for answers to questions which we feel are very important, or they feel are very important, and have been effectively stonewalled or ignored at every level of the political chain. And people, the protesters are just normal people of Newtown. They're not professional protests. They're mums and dads and grannies who have legitimate concerns about this particular site and about the village itself, and they've not been heard. And then to send in the riot squad to just bully this policy onto them, people are shocked.
And just to remind our listeners here, I mean, the intention, Kevin, as I understand it, is to have 160 male asylum seekers in kind of military-style tents. Is that right, on the grounds of River Lodge? Is that the intention?
Right. Well, initially, the people were told that the site was purely under investigation, but that was clearly a lie, in that the site was being rapidly developed. The peaceful protests managed to delay that development, and they were looking for answers to questions, for example, who actually owns the site. That's in dispute. And also looking at the environmental side of things. Newtownmountkennedy is a small village which has grown immensely quickly over the last few years, and no additional resources have been put in place. So, for example, there's no secondary school, there's no library, there's no leisure facilities, no bank. To the extent that Anbor Planola last year said there should be no further development in Newtown until these facilities are put in place. And then suddenly they find 160 young men are literally going to be dumped in a field in these tents. They are military-style tents. They're very big tents. But, it is still a wet field in Wicklow.
There's some more sinister aspects to this as well. Private security, for example, and the nature of that security. Could you tell us a little about that, Kevin?
We don't know a huge amount because the whole operation has been very, very secretive. But we understand that there is a contractor involved whose job it is to first develop the site, and they use contractors which they hire to protect the site, and then they get a contract to actually run the site afterwards. But certainly some of the private security have been quite aggressive, and there are images of some of them sort of toting replica weapons on their web pages and so on. They would all appear to be kind of like foreign henchmen, for want of a better word,
You think they may be foreigners, the security?
There's certainly some Eastern Europeans there who are big lads, but yes, they don't seem to be sort of local people.
Right. And in terms of their legitimacy, do they have license on their clothing? Are they...
The protesters have constantly asked to see licenses and identification, and that has been constantly withheld. The whole thing is very, very sinister. It's a very sinister bullying tactic from the get-go.
And the workers arriving, I think it was about 2 a.m., was it, in balaclavas as well. What are you making of that?
Well, again, the people find it very, very intimidating. There was actually 2 phases. So the peaceful protest has been running for about 5 weeks, and a week ago on Monday, the riot squad arrived with a convoy of trucks with the tents on them and other equipment, driven by men in balaclavas. And some of the trucks didn't have registration plates on them. One truck was seen with the driver actually tearing his registration plates off, balaclava clad, and the people there found that very intimidating. And the fact that they were being escorted onto the site by the Gardaí just kind of rubbed salt into the wounds, I think.
Now, local protesters having every right to protest, but we're hearing about locals being infiltrated by other actors from other areas, maybe with a more, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but maybe prepared to be violent towards the police force. What about that, Kevin? I mean, is that evident to you?
I think that is, to a certain extent, inevitable in any protest, but the protesters have tried very, very hard to keep the protest on a local, peaceful basis and to keep politics out of it.
It needn't have gotten to where it got last night.
Absolutely not. The escalation was totally on the part of the government. I mean, up until that point, the protesters had a very good relationship with the local Gardaí, who were having cups of coffee and chats, and it was a genuinely peaceful protest. People were bringing their kids down to play, but it all turned very sour when the riot squad arrived and people were forced onto the site. And what really frustrates the protesters, I think, is that after that event, there was a huge danger of things escalating further. And the situation was de-escalated by agreeing to a meeting with the developer, with Senior Gardaí, which was due to take place next Monday. And then at 2 o'clock in the morning on Thursday morning, the riot squad arrive in force with more trucks and more men in balaclavas and literally batter their way onto the site. So that was a massive. So
any good faith, any good faith that might have been built up there is lost now. Is that
completely lost by the actions of the government and the Gardaí on the situation? It could have been completely peaceful. There could have been some dialogue, which the protesters have been asking for since the day one. Dialogue and information. Stop lying to us. Start talking to us. Why is this happening? Why is the village going to be, this under-resourced village going to be swamped? It's just all the time. No answers. This is how it's going to be. We're just doing our job. Off we go. And it's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous.
What's interesting is, to the best of my knowledge, you're in the constituency of our new Taoiseach, are you not?
Well, he is in the next door town of Greystone, so he is very close, yes.
And have you had interaction with local politicians on this? And were they helping the protesters, the local protesters? Or how did that work?
The vast majority of the local politicians have chosen not to engage and just completely ignored our emails and our phone calls. Those that have engaged have spouted the party line that, we're obliged to do this, when we know that under the Lisbon Treaty and the Dublin Agreement that we are not obliged to do this. So we just get the party line and that's it. There's been no genuine engagement at any level from anybody in the political system.
Where to now, Kevin?
That's a very good question. I don't know. My fear is that this will escalate across the country because there's a palpable sense of anger. And the protesters have been getting messages from all over the country in the last few days and now all over the world. So the world is now watching what is happening in Newtownmountkennedy with utter horror. I hope that it leads to a proper debate onto why is this happening? Why are we bringing people in when we don't have to? What's behind it? There's industrial amounts of money being made in this country on the back of this. Why is this happening? My hope would be it would go in that direction rather than sort of further violent protests. But, the anger in the country of the people, I think it's 4 out of 5 people in this country say that the current policy is wrong. It's morally wrong and it's legally wrong, and they're not being listened to. And at some point, if you poke a bear hard enough, it'll bite back.
You're in the most beautiful area, I know it well, and you run a glamping site yourself there. Already, has your business been affected by Newtownmountkennedy being in the headlines for the wrong reasons, I suppose?
To be honest, it hasn't. We have guests coming in this evening and they have contacted us and said, is it okay to come? And they've been assured that it is okay to come. We're just outside the village. And to be fair, our businesses have not really been affected because there's nowhere else for people to stay around here. Yeah. Most of the hotels in Bray and around us are full of migrants. So there's very little place for people to stay. So far, we've been very lucky.
Kevin, thank you for making time for us today. Needless to say, we'll be following the story, but thank you and good morning to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
That's Kevin Haig there, running the local glamping site there in Newtownmountkennedy, and I'm sure you've seen on social media some of those